Good evening and welcome to this special coverage. Once again, Israel's actions are drawing international outrage as it announced a delay in its troop withdrawal from southern Lebanon. This comes despite a ceasefire agreement that was intended to end months of bloodshed and suffering. While Israel claims security concerns justify its decisions, critics argue that this is yet another example of its disregard for international agreements and its continued aggression in the region. The delay risks reigniting violence, with Hezbollah and Lebanese officials warning of severe consequences if the withdrawal is not completed. Israeli media has reported that Israeli occupation forces began redeploying in the western sector. They added that this decision is in accordance with the agreement signed with the Lebanese government. They stated that it comes as Israel holds talks with Washington to extend the withdrawal period from Lebanon. Additionally, they clarified that the Israeli army has been instructed not to withdraw from the eastern sector in southern Lebanon. Benny Gantz, an Israeli Knesset member, has demanded the Israeli occupation forces to remain in Lebanon's buffer zone. Gantz added that Israel must prioritize the security of northern residents and ensure that the settlements are not threatened. He also stated that the Israeli army must continue intensifying operations against any violations by Hezbollah. Hezbollah has warned against any delays, demanding full compliance with the ceasefire agreement as Israel's 60-day deadline to withdraw from Lebanese territory nears its end. In a statement, the group stressed that the withdrawal must be completed without exception. Hezbollah also urged the Lebanese government to press the sponsors of the agreement to ensure the deadline is met. It called for close monitoring of the final phase of the pullout, the full deployment of the Lebanese army, and the swift return of displaced residents. Tonight, we aim to break down these developments, their impact on the region, and the potential consequences for the fragile ceasefire. Joining me now is Dr. Mohamed Osman, an international politics specialist. Dr. Osman, thank you so much for joining us on Qnews. And let's start with the basics. Israel claims that security concerns are forcing it to delay its withdrawal from southern Lebanon. Mr. Osman, how credible is this justification, and do you think it holds any weight in the context of international law?
Thank you for having me, Salma. Of course, the Israelis, as usual, fail to make any sense. Any independent, sound-minded observer would not buy into Israel's rhetoric. Definitely occupying another country's territory will never buy you security, long-term security or stability. However, since when has Israel ever abided by any agreement it ever signed? It always has to stick to its terms of the agreement under pressure and even under duress. Sometimes they have to be forced to abide by those agreements. So as for credibility, no, they have no credibility whatsoever, because the primary thing that is impeding the implementation of the ceasefire agreement in its entirety, which comes within the context of the Resolution 1701, is Israel's failure to evacuate all the territories it occupied in Lebanon in its latest war, which started on the invasion that started at the beginning of October and ended on the 26th of November. However, Israel did not withdraw from most of the border settlements, at least in the eastern sector of southern Lebanon, and they maintained their presence over there. So in turn, Hezbollah is not complying in full either, and has not withdrew all of its forces and equipment to the north of the Litani River per the agreement. And as for international law, of course, the presence of Israeli troops in Lebanon is a huge violation of international law. Lebanon is a sovereign country, a member state of the United Nations, and is entitled to the rights and the privileges of the UN Charter, which give it the right to territorial integrity and sovereignty over all of its territory and protection from aggression. What Lebanon has been subjected to was a war of aggression launched by the state of Israel that caused havoc and caused the death of more than 4,000 people, mostly civilians, and destroyed tens of thousands of homes and wiped out entire villages and towns on the border area, and destroyed much of southern Lebanon's and eastern Lebanon's civilian infrastructure. So no, they have no legal grounds to remain in southern Lebanon, Salma.
Now, Lebanon and Hezbollah have strongly condemned this delay, calling it a clear violation of the ceasefire agreement, like you've mentioned. How significant is this delay in terms of escalating tensions? Could it lead to a complete breakdown of the truce?
It will heighten tensions. Definitely, it could cause some contained incidents of violent confrontation, but I do not believe that Hezbollah would root at the moment to resuming open hostilities with Israel, because we have to take into account the geopolitical changes that happened over the past month in the Middle East, primarily the weakening of Iran and due to the fall, due to the weakening of Hezbollah itself in the last war, and the assassination of its entire leadership was decimated. Its infrastructure was destroyed. Many of its arms depots and weapons were destroyed as well. They lost thousands of people to the pager attacks, and later on to the direct Israeli onslaught, and also due to the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. Now the land bridge between Lebanon and Iran has been severed. And now the government in Syria is very anti-Iranian, very anti-Hezbollah. It's controlled by Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, and they have common understandings with Israel as well. And Israel helped them topple the Assad regime. So it seems highly unlikely that, given this very precarious situation Hezbollah is in, that they would elect to resume open war with Israel, unless they want to meet a much worse fate than they already met in the last war. However, of course, we cannot discount anything, and we cannot discount Israeli preemptive aggression, or Israel actually starting a new wave of aggression in southern Lebanon if they find the chance. However, this will all depend on what the United States has to say.
Now, speaking of Hezbollah specifically, it issued serious warnings that if Israel did not withdraw from southern Lebanon, it would issue strong warnings against this. How do you interpret this warning if you do not think that it will retaliate?
I think that Hezbollah has nothing now but rhetoric. They have nothing but words now. Naim Qassem came out and threatened that there will be severe consequences. However, he never specified what these consequences would be. If we would compare this to speeches, for example, by the deceased Hassan Nasrallah before this war, and even during this war, before he was assassinated by the Israeli occupation forces, he would actually specify what he would do, because he knew what the tools that Hezbollah held, or at least Hezbollah believed that it had helped, and they used them in the rhetoric in order to threaten Israel. And Israel understood very well what Hezbollah could do. However, now that Hezbollah has been substantially weakened and lost its charismatic leadership, and many of its fighters are either incapacitated or dead, and as I said, that the destruction of their military infrastructure, it seems that it would be very unwise for them to go to war again. Hezbollah is not suicidal. Hezbollah is an integral part of the Lebanese political scene, and they wish to survive at the end of the day. And I think the Iranians wish for Hezbollah to survive as well, as a vital ally of theirs inside Lebanon. So I don't think he will do anything. These are empty threats, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And it saddens me to say that, but that's the truth.
You've also mentioned the United States response, and Israel is currently in talks with the Trump administration to convince them that they would like to extend their stay beyond the 60-day deadline. What are your expectations? Will Trump support this, or will he put pressure on Israel to withdraw?
It's hard to say what Trump would do regarding this matter, because Trump has surprised us so far. Even though Trump's platform has always been unconditional and unequivocal support for Israel, he actually forced Israel's hand down and forced him to ink the ceasefire agreement with Gaza, which did not, with Hamas in Gaza, which wasn't on very favorable terms to the Israelis, if you know what I mean. So in Lebanon, the situation is different. Actually, in Lebanon, the Biden administration delivered Israel an agreement that is very favorable to Israeli interests, in contrast to the agreement Trump has delivered in Gaza. But it's also not clear whether Trump is really interested in preserving the calm and the state of cessation of hostilities in Lebanon, because as I might very well know, Trump is very disinterested in the Middle East and in foreign affairs in general. And if a war, again, a second war between Hezbollah and Israel will not directly hamper U.S. interests in this regard and will not endanger U.S. security immediately, I don't think Trump would mind that much, especially that he plans to place a lot of pressure on Iran in order for them to give concessions with regards to their proxies in the region and their nuclear program. And also, I think the Israelis on their side, they are floating the idea of remaining inside southern Lebanon beyond the deadline in order to test their limits with Trump, to see how far they can go with the Trump administration. If Trump puts his foot down and tells them, no, you have to leave immediately in accordance with the timetable that was set in place, they will comply. And I think they will know that Trump is serious. If Trump does not do that and allows them to stay way beyond that and maybe even impose a long-term occupation of Lebanese territories, and this is what Israel plans to do in actuality in the border area, then it means that Trump is not willing to restrain Israel, and it might even encourage Israel to resume hostilities in Gaza after the first phase of the current ceasefire agreement and detainee exchange agreement is finished.
Now, according to Axios, Israel has told Trump administration that it's still committed to the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, but it needs more time to stay in southern Lebanon due to the deployment of the Lebanese army. How do you interpret this?
I interpret this as again, as Israel spewing lies. The only thing that is preventing the full deployment of the Lebanese armed forces in the entirety of the south of the Litani area is the Israeli army's refusal to withdraw from many parts of southern Lebanon, because they cannot deploy into the areas that the Israeli military is in. And actually, on more than one occasion, before the ceasefire, during the war, and even after the ceasefire, the Israeli army targeted the Lebanese armed forces and killed Lebanese officers and soldiers. So it doesn't seem feasible that for the Lebanese army to deploy in the areas where the Israelis haven't evacuated yet. So they're lying, and they are saying that the delay of the Lebanese army, the deployment of the Lebanese army, is the reason behind their delayed withdrawal from southern Lebanon. However, they are creating the problem and then complaining about it. So basically, this is typical Israeli deception and hypocrisy. And of course, the United States, as I told you before, it's either the U.S. will buy into this narrative and they will allow Israel to stay in southern Lebanon, or they will be committed to peace in Lebanon and they will kick them out. Especially that now the new government in Lebanon is basically a government that is very friendly to the United States. The new president came with the blessing of the United States as a result of the ceasefire agreement. And Hezbollah has given a lot of concessions by allowing this to happen, because they understand the new realities on the ground. However, now they have to understand that the internal Lebanese political structure is very complicated, especially given the ethnic and sectarian dimensions of Lebanese politics. So if they try to exert way more pressure to weaken Hezbollah further and diminish it entirely inside Lebanese politics, this could have very, very disastrous consequences for the stability and the unity of Lebanon, and will embarrass the new government led by President Aoun and by Prime Minister Salam.
Now, southern Lebanon has been devastated by the conflict, of course, with thousands displaced and communities relying heavily on international aid. What do you think the humanitarian and political fallout will be if this delay continues?
The problem is that many humanitarian organizations are unable to reach the devastated areas that have been destroyed during the war, due to the deployment of the Israeli military in these areas. And in each and every village, for example, that the Israeli army, with the occupation army, withdrew from, whenever the civil defense services and the army enter, and the humanitarian organizations, they find dozens of bodies under the rubble of dead people that remain unburied. They find devastated infrastructure, and they find stranded families that were not able to evacuate before the Israeli army walked into their villages and towns. In addition to that, reconstruction in Lebanon has to start at earnest because basically the area south of the Litani has been devastated by the war. Actually, the border towns, 42 border towns and settlements and villages have been wiped off the face of the earth, literally. Tens of thousands of housing units have been destroyed by the Israeli army. So the reconstruction of these areas will take a substantial amount of time. And there are more than 1 million displaced Lebanese, mostly from southern Lebanon, who are unable to go back to their villages and their home, and are creating a huge burden on the areas that they have been displaced to due to the existing acute economic crisis already in Lebanon way before the war. So I think that the withdrawal of the Israeli army will further facilitate humanitarian aid and the rebuilding and reconstruction process of Lebanon could then start.
Speaking of Israel's actions, they often seem to test the limits of international patience. Do you think this delay reflects a broader pattern of Israel disregarding international agreements, and how should the global community respond to such behavior?
Indeed, Salma, it does. It does display Israel's absolute and complete and utter disregard of international law, of international agreements, or even basic moralities and basic sensibilities. The Israelis completely disregard that. What they did in Lebanon, it's a violation of the UN Charter. It's a violation of the Geneva Conventions due to the war crimes that have been committed, the 4 Geneva Conventions. It's also a violation of international humanitarian law in general. It's also a violation of international human rights law because thousands of people in Lebanon, thousands of civilians have had their rights violated, whether the right to life, the right to bodily integrity and security of person, and many other basic human rights that were completely disregarded and violated by the Israeli occupation army. So it seems that they don't care about that. And even the ceasefire agreement, this is a part of international law. This is a treaty that was mediated between Israel and Lebanon by the United States, and the United States is the guarantor of the implementation of this treaty. However, most of the provisions of this treaty have not been implemented by Israel. They refuse to withdraw, and they carry out daily hostilities in Lebanon. They enter villages that they have not even occupied during the war. They capture them and they start demolishing homes. In the places where they already occupy, they keep demolishing homes. And every now and then they would carry out an airstrike against Hezbollah operatives or even against Lebanese civilians and the Lebanese army. Dozens of people died since the ceasefire went into effect about 50 days ago or 57 days ago, and yet no one has held Israel accountable on account of these severe violations. So unfortunately, no, they do not even acknowledge the existence of international law when their actions speak for themselves.
Now, reference to the fact that the United States and France are the 2 countries that brokered the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, what role could they play in pressuring Israel to comply with previous agreements and withdraw from Lebanon?
I think they have a role to play. I think that the United States might be willing to play a role in pressuring Israel to withdraw, even if they do not withdraw immediately after in 24 hours, I guess. They should withdraw by tomorrow or after tomorrow, 48 hours, not even 72 hours, as I said before. So I think that probably they will withdraw after that time period. However, if they withdraw a week or even a month after the agreement, then this would be a convenient result for us, at least given the abysmal situation. France, it cannot apply any pressure, in my opinion. They have become useless. Europe has become useless in this equation. Israel is the United States is the only country that can actually exert influence. And Mr. Trump, of course, is a very unpredictable person. Trump's daughter, her father-in-law, is a Lebanese billionaire. So he does have Lebanese members of his own family, and it was rumored that he might be Trump's. His name is Masoud Boulos, and he might be Trump's envoy to Lebanon, the Trump administration's envoy to Lebanon later on. So he might even play an official role in the Trump administration, and he is of Lebanese descent. So maybe he would be eager to preserve what has been accomplished already in Lebanon and maintain the calm, especially that Hezbollah has been weakened. There are no valid reasons whatsoever for Israel to occupy Lebanese territories, let alone restart hostilities again in southern Lebanon, unless they just want to resume their acts of wanton aggression and thuggery, basically.
Now, with all of these violations by Israel, then what role should the international community, particularly the Arab states, play to hold Israel accountable for this?
Well, the Arab states are doing all of what they can, given the limited tools that they have. The entirety of the Arab world has condemned what Israel has been doing, whether in Lebanon or in Gaza or elsewhere. South Africa's ICJ case has been supported by many Arab countries and joined by many Arab countries, including Egypt, for example, and Jordan. Arab member countries of the International Criminal Court have pushed for the arrest warrants against Netanyahu on account of his crimes inside the Gaza Strip. However, I do not see much that can be done more than that, Salma, because basically the United States is the only country in the world that has the actual ability to exert enough effort on Israel for them to toe the line. Not the Europeans, not the Arab states, not the Chinese, not the Russians, the United States. They are the only ones who can bring Israel to heel and force them to abide by their obligations per the agreements they signed, at least.
Now, reference to Israel's several open fronts, Israel's decision to delay its withdrawal comes at a time when its military operations in Gaza are also under scrutiny. Do you see any link between its strategy in Lebanon and its broader regional ambitions?
I think so, yes. Israel at the beginning of the war in Lebanon, it sought to establish a buffer zone inside Lebanon as part of its expansionist agenda in order to satisfy the ultra right-wing elements of the Israeli government, including Smotrich and his party, the Religious Nationalist Zionist Party, and also in order for Israel to make sure that Hezbollah cannot rebuild its military capabilities in southern Lebanon. So this is what is behind their expansionist agenda. And Israel always had its own expansionist ambitions towards southern Lebanon. Even in 1948, there was before the establishment of the state of Israel. Israel wanted the country to extend to the south of the Litani River, meaning that a part of southern Lebanon, they wanted it to be a part of the state of Israel back then. And back then, this was under the mandate of France, and France prevented the Israelis from doing this. And they did occupy southern Lebanon in 1982, maintained the occupation of the entirety of southern Lebanon until 1985, and they withdrew in 1985 to the border area and kept a buffer zone that they stayed in until the year 2000. Maybe now they want to gradually reclaim their territorial ambitions inside Lebanon and elsewhere. They are doing the same thing in Syria now with the occupation of the buffer zone, occupying about 700 square kilometers of Syrian territories. And of course, with the current agreement in Gaza, they will maintain permanently, according to many sources, a buffer zone inside the Gaza Strip, 700 meters deep. So it seems that the idea of Israeli expansionism lies within the heart of the very aggressive agenda in administering their multi-front war.
After the ceasefire deal was agreed upon in Gaza, 2 days later, Israel has launched a major military campaign in the West Bank. And now, a few days later, it refuses to withdraw from Lebanon. What do you make of this pattern?
What I'm making is that Israel is trying to create the conditions where it can actually prolong the state of war. Netanyahu's political survival is hinged upon the idea of continuous warfare. If all of the wars end and a state of normalcy is restored to Israel and the constitutional state of war is lifted, I think that Netanyahu's political future will be sealed and that he will ultimately be forced to resign, and maybe early elections will happen, or his own party will push him out or push him to out of power, basically. So that's on the personal ambitious personal ambitions part for Israel's conniving Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And as for the state of Israel, they want to take full advantage of the state of war that they have been in for the past 15 months in order to, first of all, further diminish and destroy the Palestinian cause by imposing new realities on the ground, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank, and also by carrying out more land grabs and expanding, as I told you in my previous answer to your previous question.
Yes,
that they
Dr. Osman, I'm so sorry for interrupting you because we've run out of time. That was Dr. Mohamed Osman, international politics specialist. Thank you so much for your analysis and for joining us here on Q News. Israel's decision to delay its withdrawal from southern Lebanon is yet another reminder of its ongoing aggression and disregard for peace agreements. This move not only endangers the fragile ceasefire, but also deepens the suffering of the Lebanese people who continue to endure displacement and hardship caused by this conflict. We will continue to stand against such violations and highlight the truth for our viewers. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.